My name is Chuck. I graduated from the University of California, Berkeley, in 2016. My college experience was perfect. I was part of a frat, managed my studies well, and spent just the right amount of time chasing girls. I'm still friends with many of my old frat brothers, and I recently got engaged to my fiancée, Rosie, whom I also met at Berkeley. But if you had asked me my opinion of Berkeley when I was a freshman, my answer would have been very different. What I'm about to tell you is one of the main reasons why I was never overly ambitious in high school. The Berkeley atmosphere was extremely foreign to me, and it was weird being surrounded by so many self-proclaimed high achievers. As a freshman, I was quickly swept up into the frenzy of career development and planning the next 30 years of my life. Silly, I know, but that was the nature of my school at the time. If you wanted to get any sort of offer in the business world, having a strong LinkedIn profile was a necessity. I still remember the stress of cultivating a professional image online, as if my future hinged on whom I connected with and what skills I listed. Regardless, I checked all the boxes and began my search for a summer internship. It wasn't long before my inbox chimed with a meaningful message. To my genuine surprise, a prestigious business firm had reached out to me, expressing interest in my profile. It wasn't one of those bot messages either. The substance of the message indicated that it was actually unique, designed specifically for me. I read it over like 6 times before finally responding. After a brief correspondence, I was invited to a first-round interview. I spent hours researching the company, prepping myself with all the sample questions I could find. Soon, I got a message from a guy named Armin Slawensky. I'll never forget that name. He stated that he would be my interviewer, and naturally, the first thing I did was research him. However, excitement soon gave way to puzzlement. I scoured LinkedIn for Armin's profile but found nothing. No trace of his professional footprint, no social media, nothing. I shrugged it off, attributing it to a preference for privacy. Armin and I agreed on a day and time, and he gave me the interview location. I searched it up on my phone and realized it was some random coffee shop in Oakland. This is when I started getting confused. Why would an interview not take place in Berkeley? We had tons of coffee shops and perfect places for interviews in our college town. The address online seemed normal though, so I didn't think much of it. A day before the interview, I told my friend Riley about the situation. He was even more confused than I was, telling me that it seemed fishy. I agreed but figured it was worth it for the position. He asked how I was getting there, and I told him I was Ubering. He offered to drive me, and I thanked him, taking him up on his offer. Little did I know, I might not be telling this story if he hadn't offered to drive me. It was 4 p.m. the next day when Riley rolled up to my dorm. I was extremely nervous since this was one of my first interviews. I got in the car, and we were off. 20 minutes later, I told Riley to drop me off on the street as I didn't want to be seen having a friend drop me off for an interview. He offered to wait for me, pulling out a big bag of weed from inside his dashboard. I laughed, thanked him, and shut the door. I walked a couple of minutes to the location and froze in my tracks. I looked up at the literal construction site in front of me. There was no coffee shop. Even stranger, the entire area wasn't residential. All the buildings looked closed or private. Confused, I double-checked my phone and confirmed I was in the right location. This entire block must have been recently demolished. I pulled out my phone to call Riley, but before I could, a booming voice rang out behind me. "Chuck!" exclaimed a deep voice. I whipped around and was met with an absurdly tall man wearing an expensive-looking black suit. Thank God, I thought, grateful that this whole ordeal hadn't been a setup. His presence was commanding yet oddly out of place amidst the derelict surroundings. He walked toward me with a confused look on his face. We shook hands, and when I asked about the construction site, he said he was just as surprised as I was. He furrowed his eyebrows and put his hand on his chin. "You know what? Why don't we find someplace else? Get in, he said, motioning toward the Bentley. He walked back to the car and shouted, "Shotgun's all yours." Without another word, he got in the front seat and shut the door. Excitedly, I followed. I walked around the car, admiring it a little, and couldn't help but glance into the back seat. Instead of beautiful leather seats, my eyes met a sight that sent a chill down my spine. Lying flat on the ground, obscured by the shadows, was a man. In his hand, he held something long and metal. Panic surged within me. This was a trap. I turned away from the car and ran as fast as I could. I heard the man yell my name from behind but didn't turn around. As I ran, I heard the screeching tires. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the car turning in my direction. I had to think quickly. There was no way I could outrun a car. I made it to the next intersection and faced a choice, left or right. Logic told me to turn left as it was closer, but my feet chose for me before my brain could. I sprinted across the street to the right and darted down the road. I knew I didn't have long. As if by some miracle, one of the buildings in front of me had a fire escape just low enough to jump onto. With every ounce of strength, I vaulted upwards, grabbing the ladder. I had never done a pull-up in my life, but this was life or death. I made it up the ladder and kept climbing. The Bentley whipped around the corner and stopped on the street in front of the building. I couldn't see the driver, but I knew he was looking at me. There was nothing else I could do. If they chose to follow me, I'd have to fight. The next minute felt like an eternity. The car stood there a little while longer, then accelerated down the street, turning left. I couldn't breathe. I pulled out my phone and called Riley, screaming about what happened. I stayed on the fire escape until he found me. I got in the car, and we sped off in silence. The aftermath of this whole thing was uneventful. I blocked it out and refused to talk about it, even with Riley. As far as I was concerned, it never happened. But as much as I tried, there are times like right now when I can't help but recall every horrifying detail of what could have been the last day of my life.